"I think there's a body in that truck." I said it out loud before I even realized the words were tumbling out of my mouth. My voice cracked just enough to startle the guy beside me, Brad, who nearly dropped his coffee. He gave me that look, half skeptical, half annoyed, that I'd grown used to during my years with the rescue team. "What do you mean?" he muttered, eyes narrowing as he followed my gaze across the overgrown lot. We'd been called to this old industrial property on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. Nothing out here but rusted trailers, knee-high weeds, and a silence that was too heavy for comfort. The tip had come in anonymously, just a scratchy voice on the line saying there was a starving puppy guarding an abandoned truck, wouldn't leave no matter what. The local shelter passed it to us, and now here we were, sun beating down on our shoulders, and this little scene in front of us giving me goosebumps. The truck was a faded blue F-150, one of the older models with a dented hood and moss streaks trailing down its sides. The back tires were flat, and vines had begun their slow climb up the chassis. But what stopped me cold, what made me say something as dramatic as what I just blurted out, was the puppy. He sat like a statue right in front of the driver's door. Not barking, not pacing, just sitting, watching. A scruffy little thing with big ears and a wiry coat the color of oatmeal. His ribs were showing, and his eyes looked too big for his face. But he wasn't scared. He wasn't begging for food or water. He was guarding. Brad squinted. "Maybe someone left food inside, and he's just being territorial." "Maybe," I replied, but my gut said no. There was a kind of quiet loyalty in that dog's posture, like he wasn't guarding something for himself. He was guarding someone. We approached slowly, keeping our hands low and our voices gentle. The grass crunched beneath our boots, and every few steps, the puppy's ears would twitch, but he didn't move, didn't growl, just stared. "Hey there, little guy," I said, kneeling about 10 feet away. "You hungry? We brought some food." Brad popped open a can of wet food, the smell wafting strong and meaty. The puppy's nose twitched, but his feet stayed planted. His gaze didn't even flick to the food. It stayed on us. And the truck. "This is weird," Brad muttered. "Yup," I said. "Really weird." I edged a bit closer, placing the open can just out of reach, but close enough to tempt. Still nothing. That puppy wasn't budging. So I went around. While Brad stayed with the pup, murmuring softly, I crept around to the passenger side of the truck. The door was locked. Dust covered the window. I leaned in and wiped a clean patch with my sleeve, squinting through the murk. At first, I didn't see anything. Just empty seats, a pile of fast food wrappers, and a faded hoodie crumpled on the passenger floor. But then I noticed it. Movement. Just a flicker. A hand? "Brad," I called, my voice low but firm. "There's someone inside." He blinked, then stood. The puppy whined for the first time. Brad joined me at the window. "You sure?" "I saw something. Could be a kid." We didn't waste a second. Brad radioed in for assistance, while I moved back to the driver's side. The dog didn't growl when I approached this time, but he did step in front of the door like he was blocking me. "I need to open this, buddy," I said softly. "If there's someone inside, we've got to help them. That's what you've been doing, isn't it?" He tilted his head, as if trying to decide whether I could be trusted. I slowly reached out, let him sniff my fingers. His nose was cold and dry. After a few seconds, he stepped aside. The door creaked open. The smell hit first, stale air, sweat, and something faintly sweet, like dried fruit and sickness. And there, crumpled in the back seat, was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, curled into a ball, clutching a small stuffed elephant. His face was gaunt, his skin pale, and his clothes clung to him like he hadn't changed them in days. He didn't wake up when I called to him, didn't even stir. By the time the ambulance arrived, we'd gotten the boy out, wrapped in my coat, the puppy whining non-stop at our heels. The paramedics said he was dehydrated and malnourished, but he'd make it. They thought he'd been alone in the truck for at least 3 days, maybe longer. The story unraveled slowly. The truck was registered to a man named Gary Tiller, who had reported it stolen 2 weeks earlier. Turns out Gary's ex-son-in-law had taken off with it, and with his son. Custody battle, restraining orders, the whole ugly mess. The dad, they guessed, had abandoned the truck when it broke down and left the kid inside. The puppy must have followed them from somewhere, maybe even from wherever the dad had stopped for gas or food. Nobody knew where the dog came from. No chip, no collar, no name. But the boy, once he woke up in the hospital the next day, whispered something that made the nurse tear up. He stayed with me the whole time. He kept me warm. We took the puppy in that afternoon. I cleaned him up, fed him real food, let him sleep curled up in a basket in my office. He barely moved except to nuzzle my ankle every now and then. I named him Buster. It just felt right. The story spread quickly. Local news picked it up. Then national outlets. Headlines like, "Loyal stray guards boy left in abandoned truck" popped up all over my feed. People donated food, toys, even offers to adopt him. But I had a feeling Buster wasn't ready to leave. He kept pacing the hallway outside the hospital room, ears perked, waiting. The boy, his name was Thomas, started talking more as he got stronger. Said his dad told him to stay put, that he'd be back soon. Said he got scared when it got dark. But the puppy crawled in next to him and didn't leave. Not even when Thomas cried or shivered. "Why'd he stay?" he asked me one afternoon, his tiny fingers rubbing Buster's scruffy ears. "I don't know," I told him honestly. "Maybe he knew someone needed him." Thomas nodded like that made perfect sense. We never found the dad. Authorities believed he hitched a ride out of state, but nobody stopped looking. Meanwhile, Thomas's grandparents filed for emergency custody. Nice folks. Quiet. The kind of people who send handwritten thank you notes. They came by the hospital every day, bringing books and puzzles, and always asked if Buster could stay. We worked something out. Buster split his time. Days at the hospital, nights at my place. Until Thomas could go home. And when he finally did, a week later, the first thing he said was, "Can Buster come too?" His grandpa knelt beside him. "If he wants to." Buster didn't hesitate. He jumped right into their truck like he belonged there. But that's not where the story ends. Not even close. Because 2 days later, we got another call. Another puppy. Another truck. And what we found inside would change everything we thought we knew about what Buster had really been doing out there. To be continued. The second I stepped out of the truck, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the heat. It was late spring, and the Ohio air had that clingy kind of warmth that stuck to your neck. It wasn't the location either. Another empty field, another old truck sitting lopsided in the weeds. No, it was the silence again. Too still. Too quiet. That eerie stillness that settles before a storm, or after something unspoken. Brad met me near the fence. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He wasn't grinning. That alone made my stomach clench. He pointed. "Look familiar?" I followed his finger and stared at the beat-up red Dodge sitting under the shadow of a leaning billboard. Hood popped halfway, vines growing up through the wheels. A nearly identical setup to the last one, right down to the type of terrain. But this time, there was no puppy sitting guard, just tracks in the dirt, small paw prints circling the passenger side. "No dog?" I asked. "Gone by the time the property owner showed up this morning, but he swears it was there last night. Wouldn't let him get close to the truck." I approached slowly, ears tuned for sound. The windows were rolled up, but a musty, hot stench leaked from the cracked weather stripping. Brad had already tried the doors. Locked. We circled the truck, then stopped short. On the back bumper, smeared with dirt, was a series of claw marks. Not random scratching. Deliberate. Repeated. Like something had tried to climb or signal. I pulled on gloves and peeked inside through the back window. I had to squint past the grime and dead leaves trapped inside, but there it was. A box. Cardboard. Closed with duct tape. And it moved. "Call dispatch," I said. "Tell them to bring bolt cutters and a med kit." Brad was already on it. The lock took time. Rusted shut, corroded around the edges, the kind you swear was forged in another century. But finally the door creaked open. We held our breath. The smell was worse than the last time, like wet paper and urine and heat all churned together. I stepped forward, crouched by the box, and pressed my ear to it. Scratching. Faint whimpering. I slit the tape. Inside, barely able to lift their heads, were 3 puppies. All different colors. One tan, one black, one white, with a black patch over its eye. They were skeletal. Flies buzzed around their matted fur. But they were alive. We moved fast. Brad swaddled 2 in clean towels, while I cradled the 3rd. Its ribs moved shallowly against my chest. We didn't wait for the van. We drove them straight to the vet clinic. The vet techs sprang into action. Fluids, exams, shaving down fur to check for infections. The youngest, the white one, had a broken leg, likely from being jostled around in the box. All 3 were severely underweight, but their hearts were beating, and their lungs were strong. As I stood in the hallway watching through the glass, something clicked. "Buster brought us here," I said quietly. Brad looked at me. "What do you mean?" I turned toward him. The last truck, he was guarding it. This one, he wasn't there, but he'd been here. Those paw prints, the scratches on the bumper, he found these pups, and somehow he led someone to notice them. Brad didn't argue. He didn't have to. He knew the odds. How many empty trucks sat on forgotten properties across the county? And yet we'd found 2, both with animals inside, both with signs of one very particular dog. Later that night, I sat at my desk, Buster curled in a tight ball at my feet. He barely stirred when I moved, only wagged his tail lazily when I reached down to scratch his head. "You knew they were out there," I whispered. "You knew they needed help." He thumped his tail once. I opened my laptop and pulled up a county property map. If these trucks were related, maybe there was a pattern. I marked both locations, drew a line between them. Not quite a straight shot, but there was overlap. A small stretch of road between 2 abandoned grain silos. Just a hunch, but my gut wouldn't let it go. The next morning, I packed Buster into the front seat of the truck and drove. Brad followed in his own car, still half skeptical, but curious enough to indulge me. We passed fields, barns with collapsed roofs, and finally pulled over near the first silo. Buster jumped out before I opened the door all the way. He didn't run. He trotted, straight toward the path between the 2 silos. I glanced at Brad. He raised an eyebrow. "Now I believe you." We followed. The path twisted through knee-high grass, broken fencing, and sun-bleached debris. I kept my eyes on Buster. He didn't sniff around or pause. He moved with purpose, slowing only when we reached a clearing behind the second silo. There, hidden behind a sheet of corrugated metal leaning against a tree, was a crate. Buster sat in front of it. I approached and knelt. The crate's door was zip-tied shut, but I could see movement inside. A flash of brown fur. Then a whimper. A grown dog. Female. Muzzle gray, eyes wide and glassy. She was panting hard, and her body trembled from exhaustion. "Easy, girl," I murmured. "We're gonna get you out." We snipped the ties and lifted the door. She didn't lunge or bark. She simply crawled out and collapsed at Buster's side. He licked her face. My heart clenched. These weren't random rescues. These were reunions. Buster had known exactly where to go. And now, sitting in the grass beside this frail dog, he looked at me like he was asking, "Ready for the next one?" That night, I dug through old reports. Missing pets, abandoned litters, rescue calls that went unanswered. One report caught my eye. A woman, 2 towns over, who claimed her neighbor had been breeding dogs in secret, then dumping the ones that didn't sell. No one had ever confirmed it, and the neighbor moved away months ago. I pulled the address, marked it on my map. It was dead center between the 3 locations Buster had led us to. I leaned back and exhaled. "You've been trying to tell us all along, haven't you?" He lifted his head. No bark, just eyes locked on mine. Hopeful, patient, waiting. The next day, we filed a request with the sheriff's department. They agreed to escort us to the property. "Just to check it out," they said. "No guarantees. The house had been empty for months. Boarded windows, lawn overgrown. The driveway was cracked and buried under weeds. But the side yard? That was where we found them. 6 crates. Only 3 still had dogs inside. The others were empty. Rotted bedding, tipped bowls, scratch marks along the walls. The 3 still occupied, held pups maybe 6 weeks old. One was blind in one eye. Another had a rash along its belly. But all were alive. As the sheriff took photos and made calls, Buster circled the yard. He sniffed the crates, checked the perimeter, then sat by the tree line. Waiting. I walked over. "What do you see?" He looked toward the woods. We followed him. 50 yards in, tucked under a rusted camper shell, was a final crate. Inside, too weak to stand, was the last of them. A pup with fur like charcoal, eyes closed, body barely breathing. Buster lay down beside the crate. We carried that last pup out together. By the end of the day, animal control had taken custody of the property. Vets examined all the rescued dogs. The story broke again. Hero dog leads rescuers to hidden puppy mill. Donations poured in. Volunteers showed up by the dozen. But the hero didn't care about headlines. He cared about the next crate, the next shadow, the next soft whimper in the night. And I started to realize something. Buster wasn't just a stray who found a boy. He was a survivor who'd once been left behind and had made a silent promise never to let it happen to anyone else again. The real question now wasn't what he'd found. It was what else was still out there. And Buster? He was just getting started. If I hadn't heard the barking myself, I might have thought it was a dream. It was late, maybe a little past midnight, when the sound carried through the woods behind my house, high-pitched and frantic. Not panicked, intentional. Buster had been sleeping at the foot of my bed, snoring lightly with his legs twitching in some dream only dogs understand. But the second he heard the bark, he was up, fully alert. Tail stiff, ears pricked, already pacing by the door. I rubbed my face and grabbed a flashlight. "You sure about this, boy?" He gave me a single, quiet bark. That was enough. I pulled on boots, grabbed the keys, and we were off. Brad was used to my middle-of-the-night texts by now. I didn't wait for a response. I just sent the location ping and drove. The road curved around the edge of the forest preserve, where the trees pressed close to the two-lane highway. Buster whined every time we passed a turnoff, until finally he thumped his paw against the window. "Here?" he barked once. I slowed, turning off into a patch of gravel barely wide enough for the truck. There was no official trail here, just a thin break in the underbrush where deer might wander. But Buster knew exactly where to go. We followed a winding path for almost 15 minutes, my flashlight beam dancing across fallen branches and moss-covered rocks. Then I saw it. A rusted, overturned wheelbarrow half buried in the brush. And beside it, a tarp. Buster pushed forward, nose to the ground, tail wagging now. He pawed at the tarp gently until I pulled it back. Another crate. This one was smaller, tucked beneath a layer of wet leaves and nearly hidden by a fallen tree limb. The plastic door was held shut with wire, and a heavy log had been placed on top. Almost like someone didn't want it found, I squatted down and shone the flashlight inside. One puppy. Just one. Gray with speckled white paws, curled so tight I couldn't tell if it was breathing. "Hey there," I whispered. "We've got you now." Buster lay beside the crate, eyes steady. He didn't move as I cut the wire and gently lifted the pup out. It was cold. So cold. But its chest rose and fell. Faintly. Weakly. I wrapped it in my jacket and hustled back through the woods. Buster never left my side. By the time we got to the emergency vet, the sky had begun to shift into the early hues of morning. They took the puppy in right away, the techs quiet but focused. I waited outside with Buster, the two of us sitting on the curb. Brad arrived just as the sun broke the horizon. His face said it all. Tired, confused, and yet somehow not surprised. "Another one?" he asked. "Yep." "Same type of crate?" "Same setup. Same hiding tactics. But this time, someone tried to bury it." He blew out a breath. "So they know we're coming." That thought settled between us like a stone in water. Whoever had been dumping these dogs, it wasn't random. They were methodical. Organized. And now they were trying to cover their tracks. Inside, the vet gave us a cautious thumbs up. The puppy, female, roughly 5 weeks old, was stable. Severely underweight, but no broken bones, no signs of abuse. Just left to die in the cold. Buster finally relaxed when I told him. He lay his head on my foot and sighed like he'd been holding that breath all night. We drove home in silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were chasing a ghost. Every time we found one, another lead went cold. And yet Buster always knew. It wasn't guessing. It wasn't luck. He remembered something. I started looking deeper. Back at my desk, I pulled up every animal abuse case filed in the county in the last 3 years. Most had dead ends. No suspects, just dumped litters or abandoned adults. But one case, buried in the list, stood out. 2 years ago. 5 puppies found in a shallow ditch, half covered by branches. One survived. No security footage, no witnesses. But the crate description? Identical. Plastic shell, steel door, cheap brand from the same supplier. The survivor had been adopted by a woman named Maggie Ross, lived just 2 towns over. I gave her a call, explaining who I was and why I was calling. She paused. "You're the one with the hero dog, aren't you?" "Depends on which headline you read," she laughed. "Come by. I think you should meet Duke." Duke turned out to be a stocky mutt with deep-set eyes and a white streak down his back. When he saw Buster, he froze. Tail stiff, posture tense. Then he barked once and rushed forward. Buster met him halfway. They sniffed, circled, and then, like a switch flipped, they started wagging and yipping, doing little play bows and nudging each other's shoulders. Maggie stared. I've never seen him do that. Ever. I smiled. They remember. She nodded slowly. He was never the same after I got him. Sweet but distant. Never played with other dogs. Now this. We sat on the porch and talked. She told me where she found him, what the crate looked like, how the vet said he might not pull through. I showed her the map, the red dots, the lines connecting locations. Her house sat just outside the ring. So whoever did this, they've been at it a long time, she said. Longer than we thought. Buster and Duke played in the yard until they were panting. Then they lay side by side like old friends catching up on lost time. As we drove home, I looked at Buster in the rearview mirror. You were one of the first, weren't you? His ears twitched. Back at the station, Brad was already working the next step. He had pulled property records for all vacant lots within the mapped radius. We focused on spots with repeat complaints, trespassing, abandoned trailers, strange noises. One stood out. A storage yard just off the highway, technically owned by a company that went bankrupt years ago. It had been empty for months. But recently, a few reports had popped up. Barking at night, odd smells, movement behind the gates. We got a warrant. The place was a maze of metal sheds and overgrown alleys, tall fences topped with rusted barbed wire. But the moment we stepped inside, Buster took off. Not wild, not erratic, like a soldier following a scent. We ran after him, weaving between rows of corrugated containers until he stopped in front of one. The lock was old, weak. We broke it in seconds. Inside were 7 crates. 4 had dogs. The others held bags of old food, empty water bowls, and piles of newspaper stained with what I didn't want to identify. The dogs were silent. Not because they weren't scared, but because they had learned not to make noise. Learned that noise didn't bring help. But today, it did. We loaded them up, called animal control, called the vet, called everyone. It became a full-on operation. By nightfall, every dog had been checked, tagged, and placed with foster homes. And Buster? He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, watching, waiting. I sat beside him with a cup of tea, hand resting on his back. "You're not done, are you?" I asked. He didn't move. Outside, the moon rose high, casting silver over the trees. Somewhere, out there, was another hidden crate, and Buster was already planning how to find it. I'd never seen Buster hesitate before. The day started like any other. Sunlight trickling through the trees, the buzz of summer bugs hanging in the air, and a small pile of case files stacked on my desk waiting for attention. Brad was out checking in with foster homes, and I was trying to organize the growing list of rescues that had come in over the past few weeks. It had become more than a trend. It was a pattern now. A string of coordinated abandonments that spanned miles, months, and a network we still didn't fully understand. Buster had been pacing since sunrise. He didn't want breakfast, didn't want to rest. He just hovered near the back door, tail low, ears flicking at every sound. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't just alertness. It was something deeper, like dread. "Where to, boy?" I asked, rising to my feet and slinging the keys off their hook. He led me without hesitation, not even glancing back as we moved to the truck. We drove northeast, past the outskirts of town, where pavement turned to gravel, and old barns stood like hushed memories in wide, empty fields. I kept one eye on the road, the other on Buster. He was perched upright, body tense, nose twitching at every gust of wind coming through the cracked window. After about 20 minutes, he started to whine. We turned onto a narrow lane overgrown with weeds, nearly hidden from the road. It led to a broken-down structure, a barn that had collapsed in on itself, only its skeletal beams left standing like ribs. A trailer sat nearby, paint peeled, windows shattered, door swinging gently in the wind. Buster didn't bolt this time. He got out slow, tail low, and took cautious steps toward the barn. "Something's off," I muttered, following behind with my flashlight already drawn. We moved through the debris carefully. The place stank, rot, mold, something sour clinging to the wood. But there was another layer beneath it, a coppery scent. Old blood. Buster stopped near a pile of hay bales that had long since collapsed. He pawed gently at the base. I bent down and peeled back some loose straw. A crate. Cracked open, empty. Old stains along the bottom. But no dogs, no movement, no sound. That's when I saw the chain. Half buried under the dirt, leading from the crate to a rusted loop bolted to the barn beam. And a collar. Still attached. Buster whimpered. It was the first time I'd ever heard him make that sound. He sniffed the collar, then stepped back and sat. Silent. Still. Like he was grieving. I looked around, suddenly aware of how cold the place felt, even in the midday sun. "Someone left them here," I said softly, and never came back. Buster didn't move. We stayed like that for a while, not searching, not chasing, just acknowledging. Eventually he stood and walked toward the trailer. The door creaked open easily. Inside, it was a mess. Torn cushions, scattered wrappers, and scribbled notes pinned to the walls. Maps, supply lists, dog food brands circled in red ink. A pattern emerged. Crude, but deliberate. Locations, dates, even numbers beside them. I took photos of everything. On the floor, partially tucked under a moldy rug, I found a notebook. The handwriting was jagged, uneven. Some pages were filled with rants, complaints about breeders, shelters, people who didn't understand the cause. But a few entries caught my breath. "Only the strong survive. Let nature sort them. Can't save them all, but we can save the best." And then, scribbled sideways across the last page, "He keeps following. That brown dog won't stop, thinks he's a hero. Let's see how long he lasts." I stared at the page for a long time. Then I tore it out and folded it into my pocket. Buster had been noticed, which meant we were getting close. We called in backup. The property was marked for full investigation, but by then, whoever had been here was long gone. Back at the shelter, Buster didn't eat, didn't nap. He sat near the back exit, nose pressed against the glass, eyes scanning the trees. Brad came in later that afternoon. "Got another tip," he said. "Someone saw crates being loaded into a van near the quarry road last night. No plates, just a guy in a hoodie. Said he looked nervous." I didn't need to look at Buster. He was already standing. We left within the hour. The quarry road was 30 miles south, winding, remote, barely used since the mining company packed up shop a decade ago. We parked at the ridge and scanned the area. Empty. Still. Until Buster took off. I shouted, but followed, heart pounding as we slipped through underbrush and slid down loose gravel paths. He didn't slow, didn't stop. At the base of the quarry, near a pile of rusted pipes, was another tarp, and under it, 3 more crates. 2 were empty. The third held a dog with dull eyes and a swollen leg. She lifted her head when we approached, too tired to bark. Buster nosed her gently. We radioed it in. The rescue van came fast. The vet said she had a bad infection but would recover. Brad stood next to me, watching the dog loaded into the vehicle. "They're trying to ditch them faster now. We're closing in." "Or they're leading us somewhere," I muttered. Buster turned his head. I didn't like the look in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room while Buster sat on the couch, head resting on the windowsill. The air was heavy, like something was about to break. Then, just past midnight, my phone rang. It was the shelter's night shift volunteer. "Someone broke in," she said, voice shaking. "They didn't take anything, but they left something." We got there in 10 minutes. In the center of the shelter's intake room was a crate. A single crate. Inside was a dog. But not just any dog. It was Duke. The same Duke we'd visited. The same dog Buster had played with. He was injured. Not badly, but his side was scraped, and his collar was missing. Buster rushed to him, sniffed, and licked his face. We checked the cameras. The feed had been wiped. But the back door had been forced open. No one saw who did it. But the message was clear. They weren't hiding anymore. They were watching us now. And Buster was their target. Buster didn't leave Duke's side for the next 2 days. He barely slept, barely ate. He curled around him like a shield, soft growls rumbling from his chest whenever someone new walked into the room. We gave them space. The vet said Duke's injuries were mostly surface level, but the trauma went deeper. His body trembled when the door creaked, and he flinched at shadows. I'd seen dogs come out of far worse, but never had one been returned like this. Delivered. Like a warning. Brad sat on the bench outside the shelter with a clipboard full of photos and a folder thicker than it should have been. "We've got to push harder," he said. "This guy, whoever he is, he's not just abandoning dogs anymore. He's baiting us. He's baiting Buster." "Yeah," I said. "And Buster's still taking the bait." He looked through the glass door where Buster lay beside Duke, head pressed against the edge of the bed. "You think he knows what's happening?" "I think he always has." Later that evening, I sat down with the notebook again, the one we'd found in the trailer. Something about the phrasing stuck with me. It wasn't just chaotic, it was deliberate, organized. The guy who wrote it wasn't mentally unstable. He was methodical and dangerous. I pulled out a map, started pinning locations again, only this time I added timestamps. Each drop site had been used, then returned to, once, twice, sometimes even 3 times, like test sites, or patterns he was tracking. And every few months, he went quiet, like he was watching. The notebook's last few entries all referenced one town in particular. Wainscott, a tiny speck on the edge of the county line, surrounded by farmland and forgotten roads. Not much there except an old feed store, a diner, and a closed-down fairground that hadn't seen a festival since before the pandemic. I marked it with a red circle. "Tomorrow," I told Buster as I crouched beside him. "We go to Wainscott." He lifted his head and gave my hand a small lick. By morning, Duke was stable enough to rest on his own. He watched us leave, tail thumping once as Buster gave him a nudge before hopping into the truck. We rolled into Wainscott just before noon. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the abandoned fairground fences. We parked near the rusted ticket booth and waited. Buster sniffed the air, then jumped down and began walking slowly, tail twitching. I followed. He led us around the main arena and behind an old shed where the scent of mildew and motor oil hung heavy. He stopped by a locked gate, sniffed the hinges, then barked once. The gate creaked open easily. Inside was a narrow path that led into a grove of oak trees. Quiet. Too quiet. We moved forward step by step until we found the first sign, a shredded blanket lying beneath a sapling, its corners weighed down by rocks. Then a piece of chain. Then a food bowl, half buried in dirt. "Someone was here," I whispered. Buster lowered his nose and moved faster. Within 100 yards, we came to a clearing with tire tracks cutting through the grass. And in the middle of it, 2 crates. One was empty, the other had a puppy inside. No more than 4 months old. White with a black snout and trembling all over. I crouched and spoke gently. "Hey there, it's okay now. You're okay." The puppy whimpered but didn't retreat. I opened the crate slowly and let him come out on his own time. Buster sat still, watching. As soon as the pup stepped out, he crawled under Buster's chin and curled into a ball. Brad arrived just as I finished texting him the location. He brought supplies and scanned the perimeter. "No cameras, no other crates," he said. "But look at this." He held out a scrap of paper tucked under a rock nearby. On it, scrawled in black marker, "Nice try, try harder." I folded it and stuck it in my pocket. The game was escalating. We took the pup back to the shelter, and Buster refused to leave his side. The little guy wouldn't eat unless Buster was nearby. We named him Tuck. The next day, another call came in. A hiker had found a group of cages behind an abandoned gas station, 20 miles west. We rushed out there. 4 crates, 3 with dogs, 1 with blood on the inside walls. 2 of the dogs were malnourished but stable. The third, a young golden mix, had a dislocated shoulder. All 3 crated dogs had been left facing the road, like they were supposed to be seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being directed, herded like sheep. And Buster was the compass this maniac was using to navigate his twisted plan. That night, I sat in my office, maps spread everywhere, files open, red pins and markers tracking every move. I noticed something. Each location spelled something if you drew a line, a crooked loop that curved back on itself. Not a symbol, more like a question mark. "What are you trying to ask?" I muttered. Buster sat quietly behind me. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message, just a photo. It was the feed store in Wainscott, and in front of it, chained to the door, was another crate. I bolted up. We made it there in under 20 minutes. The store was closed. No one around. And yes, just like the photo showed, a crate sat in front of the door. This time, though, there was no dog inside, just a note. You can't save them all. And beneath that, I wonder what happens when the dog chooses someone else. Buster sniffed the crate, then lifted his head, nose twitching furiously. He took off. We ran after him through back lots and alleyways, past dumpsters and fences. He paused only once, at a drainage pipe. He barked and looked back at me. I dropped to my knees and shone my flashlight in. A child, barely 10 years old, holding a dog. The boy blinked at the light but didn't speak. "It's okay," I said, heart thudding. "We're here to help." The dog in his arms, skinny, scared, but alert, licked his face. Buster lay down by the pipe's opening and whined. The boy crawled forward slowly. We got him out. We got both of them out. His name was Eli. Said the man in the hoodie promised to feed the dog if Eli held on to him for a while. Then he left. Never came back. They said the dog was special, he told me. Said he knew how to find things. I looked at Buster. We weren't just chasing a trail anymore. We were part of the trap. Eli wouldn't let go of the dog. Even after we got him safely into the truck, even after the paramedics checked him over and offered him a juice box and a blanket, he kept one arm wrapped tight around the dog's midsection. The dog didn't try to wriggle free. He just sat there, nose tucked into Eli's armpit, as if the two of them had made a silent deal. No one leaves without the other. Brad rode in the back with them while I drove. Buster curled on the front seat beside me. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he needed to be sure that the boy was still there. Still safe. At the shelter, we cleared out one of the quieter rooms and let Eli and his dog settle on the big padded cot near the corner. Eli said the dog's name was Henry. No idea where it came from. No collar, no tags, just Henry. "I think he used to belong to someone nice," Eli whispered, eyes wide but tired. "He doesn't bark when I hold him." I nodded. "That's a good name. You did a brave thing staying with him." Eli looked at me like he wasn't sure if he believed me yet, like he'd been told to trust people before and had learned the hard way not to. I didn't press. I left some snacks by the door, told him he could rest, and stepped out. Brad leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "We need to call in the state," he said. "This is bigger than we thought." "I know. This isn't about dogs anymore. He's using them to bait people. Kids now. Or maybe he always was." We stayed silent for a long minute. Back in my office, I updated the map again. Red pins for rescue sites. Blue ones for the decoys. Black pins for sightings of the hoodie man, though none had given us more than a rough shape and vague direction. Then I added a green pin for Eli. A live witness. I flipped through the folder of photos. Some were case images. Rescue sites, crates, recovered dogs. Others were screenshots from traffic cams. Nothing definitive, but a few captured grainy images of a pale van. Older model. Boxy. Dent in the rear passenger side. The same van spotted near 2 different drop sites. I stared at the image until my eyes burned. Then I remembered the feed store, the one from the photo that got sent to my phone. I went back through my call log. No number. No ID. Just a timestamp and that image. The number was now dead. The person behind this wasn't just trying to scare us. They were playing a game. And they thought they were winning. The next morning, Eli was still quiet, but more alert. He let one of the staff bring him pancakes, and Henry curled at his feet. Buster lay nearby, his presence like a safety net. "Do you remember anything else?" I asked gently. "Anything about the man who brought you there?" Eli poked at his food. He had gloves on. He didn't look at me much, but he talked to Henry, like Henry was his partner or something. What did he say to him? Stuff like, "Show me the way," and "You're the only one who gets it." Weird stuff. I nodded slowly. Did he say where he was going? Eli shrugged. He said he had more work to do. That didn't tell me much, but it confirmed something I was starting to believe. The man in the hoodie thought he was doing something important, not just dumping dogs. He thought he was training them, teaching them, using them. Over the next few days, we got 3 more calls. One from a jogger who spotted a dog limping along the edge of the freeway. Another from a retired couple who found a crate behind their barn. And one from a gas station worker who saw a man load dogs into a van before peeling out without paying. We responded to all 3. Only 2 dogs survived. Each time Buster grew more agitated. He paced. He whined. He stood by the door at all hours like he was waiting for the next whisper from the woods. And then it came. A new note, taped to the front door of the shelter early one morning. Plain paper, bold black marker. "This one's for your hero." No crate, no dog, just coordinates scribbled underneath. Brad wanted to wait. Call backup. Prep a team. But Buster had already jumped into the truck, staring at me through the windshield like time was up. I couldn't say no. We followed the coordinates. Through rural back roads and fog-covered fields, down a path that had once been paved but now cracked with grass pushing up between the stones. The pin landed us at the edge of an old orchard. Trees gnarled and overgrown, fruit long gone. In the middle of the clearing stood a metal shed with a sliding door slightly ajar. Buster growled. I pulled out my flashlight and motioned to Brad. "Stay close." We entered slowly. The smell hit first. Not just rot. Chemicals, bleach, old rust. Inside, crates lined the walls, some empty, some with doors open, and in the far corner, a makeshift table with a row of notebooks stacked neatly beside an old laptop. Buster went to the far end of the room and stopped. He barked once. There was a small crate, bigger than the others. Inside was a dog with white fur, eyes open, breathing shallow. Beside her, a cloth bag. I opened it and found a torn photograph. It showed a young girl holding the dog in a yard, and on the back, written in the same black marker, "Not every rescue is yours." We brought the dog out, rushed her to the clinic. She lived, but just barely. That night I went through the notebooks we recovered, pages upon pages of logs, names of dogs, places, notes on behavior, and a recurring phrase, "The signal is strongest with the ones who've survived." I didn't understand it, but I saw one name repeated in the margins, Buster. He wasn't just known, he was the centerpiece. Someone out there was watching his every move, testing how far he'd go, what he'd lead us to. And I had a feeling we were only scratching the surface. A week passed. Things quieted. Too quiet. Then the shelter's doorbell rang late one evening. No call, no warning. Just a soft buzz and the sound of a package dropping onto the mat. I opened the door and found a box. Inside was a small toy, a squeaky bone, and a note. "He's ready." Buster sniffed it once and looked at me. His tail didn't wag. We weren't being tested anymore. We were being summoned. The note had no fingerprints, no scent Buster could latch onto, nothing to trace. Just that single line, scrawled in block letters. He's ready. We stared at the box for a long time. Brad stood across from me, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw clenched hard enough to make his temple twitch. "This isn't a clue," he said finally. "It's a challenge." "No," I said. "It's worse. It's an invitation." Buster hadn't moved from his spot by the door. He didn't sniff the box again. He didn't growl. He just sat there, tail still, eyes locked on the trees outside like he was waiting for something. Or someone. By noon the next day, we'd pulled everything off the boards. All the pins, all the photos, all the scraps of notes and maps and location printouts. We laid them out again, this time across the floor of the staff room. Every lead, every rescue, every line in the sand this guy had dared us to cross. Eli and Henry stayed in a guest room upstairs, under watch. Eli had been quiet since the night we brought him in, but he helped where he could. He pointed out photos of places that looked familiar. Scribbled details from memory. He even remembered a decal on the van, something orange, shaped like a triangle. It was faded, but he was sure. Brad started pulling DMV records and old registrations from local businesses. By nightfall, we had 3 potential matches. One stood out. A pest control company that had shut down 5 years earlier after the owner was arrested for animal cruelty. The charges hadn't stuck. Witnesses retracted. Evidence disappeared. The guy walked. His name was Leonard Trask. I remembered that name. I'd read it once in an incident report from the early days of Buster's rescues. A man matching Trask's description had been spotted near the first abandoned truck, the one where we found Thomas. We ran the address on record. It came back as a defunct warehouse outside Milltown. The place had been empty for years, but satellite images from just a few months ago showed new tire tracks in the gravel lot. I looked at Buster. "Do you know that name?" I asked. He stared back. I took that as a yes. We didn't wait for morning. Brad made calls. The sheriff's office sent 2 deputies to meet us at the site. I loaded Buster into the truck. The air felt colder than it should have, like the world was holding its breath. The warehouse looked like every other half-dead structure we'd visited. Broken windows, warped siding, a chain-link fence barely holding itself up. But this time, we saw lights inside. Dim, flickering, like someone had strung up bare bulbs and called it electricity. Buster growled softly. We waited for the signal from the deputies, then breached the side door. Inside, the walls were covered in tarps. Makeshift pens lined the corners. At least a dozen crates were stacked 3 high, only half of them occupied. Most of the dogs were conscious, some too weak to bark. Others just lay there, eyes glazed. And at the far end of the warehouse, sitting behind a folding table like it was just another day at the office, was Trask. He didn't flinch when we entered, didn't reach for a weapon. He just smiled. I wondered how long it'd take him, he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Buster. The deputies moved in fast, shouting commands, weapons raised. Trask didn't resist. He stood slowly, hands raised, still staring at Buster. I knew he was different, he said, voice calm. The day I saw him in that ditch, didn't run, didn't bark, just looked at me like he understood. I froze. You had Buster? He nodded. Briefly, before he ran, left the others behind. But he came back, didn't he? Again and again. The deputies cuffed him, started dragging him toward the exit. He found every test I laid out, Trask called behind him. "Everyone! He's not just a dog, he's a beacon. You don't even realize it, do you?" Buster didn't move. He watched Trask go like he was watching a fire die out. Still dangerous, but no longer burning. We cleared the warehouse, logged every dog, tagged every crate. Rescue vans arrived within the hour. It was a full operation. Controlled. Efficient. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't it. That Trask hadn't been working alone. That somewhere out there another set of crates waited in the dark. That night, after the reports were filed and the last dog had been taken to safety, I sat with Buster on the porch. "You knew him," I said quietly. "From before." He didn't look at me, but I didn't need him to. Buster had always been chasing ghosts. Only now, I knew their names. Brad stepped outside, handed me a folder. "Trask's been quiet for years, but his last registered vehicle? Guess where it was spotted 2 months ago?" I flipped the page. A photo of a truck stop. A single frame caught a van parked behind a trailer. A man loading something into the back. "Where?" I asked. Brad pointed. "Nevada, near a small town called Elko." I frowned. "That's almost 2,000 miles away." "Exactly. Too far for one guy to handle all this." "So we've got a network." Brad nodded. I looked down at Buster. His ears twitched. He was listening. Always listening. The game wasn't over. It had just gone national. 3 days after Trask's arrest, we got a letter. No return address. Just a thick envelope shoved into the shelter's mailbox between donation flyers and a worn-out catalog of grooming tools. Brad found it first. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. Typed, not handwritten. And beneath the words, a small photo, grainy and low resolution, like it had been pulled from a gas station security feed. The message read, "Nice catch, but you're chasing the tail, not the teeth." I flipped the photo over. It showed a woman in a hoodie walking past an old motel sign. Her face was shadowed, but her hand held a leash. A leash attached to a crate with wheels. The timestamp was only a week old. The location printed in the corner, Pinedale, WI. Buster sniffed the photo. His ears twitched. He sat. "I guess we're heading west," I said. Brad and I packed quickly. 2 bags, supplies for Buster. Extra fuel tanks. We arranged temporary care for the shelter's residents and asked the local deputy to keep a close eye on the building. Eli and Henry stayed behind under foster supervision. They were safe, for now. We drove through 2 states in one long haul. No music, just the road and the low, rhythmic panting of Buster in the back seat. Every now and then, he'd sit up and stare through the window, alert as if looking for signs we hadn't spotted yet. Pinedale was a quiet town tucked in the shadow of the mountains. A few diners, a hardware store, a tired-looking post office, and the motel from the photo, a squat L-shaped building with peeling paint and flickering neon. We checked in as guests, didn't say who we were, didn't flash badges or ask questions. We waited, watched, asked about dog noises in the area. Most folks said no. Some said they'd seen a woman walking a cart near the edge of the national forest, close to the trailheads. That was enough for us. We left at dawn with Buster leading. The trail curved uphill through thick pine, and silence so still it rang in our ears. It took nearly an hour before Buster stopped. He sniffed the air, looked to the left, then he barked once. We followed him off trail, into the trees. There, behind a fallen log, half covered in pine needles, was a tarp. Under it, 2 crates. One was empty. The other held a dog. Muzzled. legs bound gently with cord, food bowl empty, water tipped over. A note was taped to the top. Half credit. The real test is deeper. We freed the dog, an older shepherd with tired eyes and a soft whine that didn't sound afraid, just relieved. We left water and a treat for her, then radioed local rescue to come pick her up. The vet met them at the trailhead. We kept going. Buster didn't pause. We hiked deeper into the forest until the trees thickened and the ground softened with moss. That's when we found the markers. Red cloth strips tied to branches. 6 of them, each one leading to the next like breadcrumbs. At the last marker, there was a camera. It was small, hidden in a birdhouse. But the lens blinked. Brad pulled out his phone. "We're being watched." I looked around. Buster growled. Then, somewhere in the distance, we heard it. A dog barking. But this one wasn't trapped. It was calling. We followed the sound, weaving between trees until we hit a small cabin nestled into the hill like it had grown there. The door was shut. The windows dark. No signs of life, except the sound of that bark. Buster moved slowly now, cautiously, his head low, his body taut. We approached the door. It creaked open with a push. Inside, the cabin was clean, sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a crate in the corner. Empty. Leashes hanging by the door, and on the wall, dozens of Polaroids, dogs, kids, trails, vans, crates. Brad moved to the photos. "She's documenting it all, like a project." There was a note pinned at the center of the collage. "You're close. Let's see if the hero can lead you home." I turned. Buster was sniffing the floor, then the air. He moved to the fireplace, stood on his hind legs, and pawed at the mantel. There was a latch. We pulled it. A panel slid open to reveal a small crawl space leading beneath the cabin. The air down there was damp, close, but we crawled anyway. And at the end, lit only by a flashlight beam, was a tunnel, hand-dug, reinforced with old boards, just tall enough to crouch through. Buster led the way. The tunnel took us beneath the hill. After several hundred feet, it opened into a larger chamber. Cages lined the wall. Some were empty. Others had food bowls and chewed-up blankets. One had a pair of puppies curled together, asleep. We moved fast. Checked every cage. No sign of the woman. But her presence was everywhere. Notes, tags, a whiteboard listing names, weights, locations. We radioed it in. Local authorities arrived an hour later. They secured the area, retrieved the animals, took photos of everything. But no one found the woman. She was gone. And so was her van. On the drive back to town, I kept replaying her note. "Let's see if the hero can lead you home." She wasn't just testing us. She was testing Buster, seeing how far he'd go, how far he'd pull us, how much he'd endure. That night, I sat in the motel parking lot while Buster curled beside my feet. Brad brought out 2 coffees. "She's next," he said. I nodded. "She knows him," I added. "Knows how he works, what he's looking for." "Then we follow him," Brad said. "Same as always." I looked at Buster. He was staring west, toward the mountains, waiting for the next signal. And we would follow. The following morning, the motel room smelled like stale coffee and trail dust. I'd slept for maybe an hour, boots still on, back aching from leaning too long against the window frame. Buster had curled into the corner of the room, his head resting on the base of my duffel bag, his breathing steady but ears twitching with every creak outside. Brad tapped the laptop keyboard again, the glow lighting up his tired face. No new hits from State Patrol. The van hasn't pinged any traffic cams since yesterday. She's careful, I muttered, rinsing my face in the sink. She knows how to vanish. But she's still leaving trails. On purpose. She wants him to follow. I looked at Buster. That's her mistake. We checked out by sunrise and drove through town one last time, stopping at the local ranger station to deliver our findings. The deputies were already combing the forest surrounding the cabin, but we knew she was long gone. Her setup had been too temporary, too practiced. Buster sat upright in the back seat again as we headed south. We didn't have an exact destination, but his behavior was the clearest compass I'd ever trusted. Every time he shifted his posture or leaned against the glass, I knew we were veering in the right direction. 3 hours out, he barked. Once, short and sharp. I pulled over to the shoulder of a remote highway lined with thick pines. There wasn't a building or road sign in sight, just gravel, wildflowers, and the buzz of cicadas. Buster jumped out, nose to the ground. He trotted along the ditch, then cut into the trees. We followed without hesitation. About 100 yards in, we found a clearing. Fresh tire tracks, flattened grass, and a single crate tucked beneath a bush, like someone had just finished hiding it before being interrupted. Inside was a puppy, barely breathing. Its fur was matted with sap, eyes crusted nearly shut. But it was alive. Buster circled the crate once, then sat down beside it and stared at the trees. She was just here, Brad said, scanning the forest. We called it in. The puppy was rushed to a nearby rescue facility. The vet said it would pull through. But the timing rattled me. She wanted us to find it. That close? That deliberate? She was walking just ahead of us now, maybe even watching from the trees. The next clue came at a rest stop 2 towns over. Taped inside the women's bathroom stall, a photo of Buster. It wasn't the one we'd used in news stories or shelter flyers. It was candid, grainy. A shot of him standing by the quarry 3 weeks ago. Underneath, famous dog, famous scent. Let's see who finds who first. We left immediately. That night, we checked into a roadside lodge outside Cedarville. Buster refused to eat. He paced the room. He stared at the door. I knew the signs by now. Another signal was coming. Sure enough, around midnight, a soft scratching noise came from the porch. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. There was no one there. Just a small plastic bag hanging from the door handle. Inside were 3 things: a dog whistle, a folded paper map with a red X, and another photo. This one showed 2 dogs, both wearing harnesses, standing outside a building that looked like an old greenhouse. I unfolded the map on the motel bed. The X was marked deep in the forest near an abandoned wildlife conservatory that had closed 6 years ago. The name clicked instantly. Black Hollow Preserve. "We go now," I said. Brad didn't argue. We left within 15 minutes, headlights slicing through the dark roads. By the time we reached the preserve's old trailhead, the sky was beginning to pale. The entrance gate was rusted open. The old visitor center loomed like a forgotten monument, its windows caked with grime, and its door half rotted from weather. We passed through slowly. Buster paused in the main lobby. He sniffed the air, then turned sharply and walked down a hallway labeled Reptile Exhibit. We followed. The hallway was lined with empty tanks, old posters faded from sun. But at the end, a set of double doors had been propped open with a cinder block. Beyond them, more cages. Dozens. All empty. Except one. A single crate stood in the center of the room. Inside A dog. Medium-sized, golden fur, alert eyes. It stood when we approached and wagged once. Taped to the top of the crate, another note. This one chose not to run. Brad let out a breath. Is this a warning? A clue? I didn't answer. I was already opening the crate. The dog stepped out slowly, looked at Buster, and then sat beside him like they already knew each other. We named him Harper. The local vet said he was in excellent condition. Clean teeth, strong vitals, no signs of trauma. Almost like he'd been taken care of up until the moment he was dropped off. And that's what terrified me. She wasn't just collecting dogs. She was training them, conditioning them. Each new one we found had more confidence, less fear, more discipline. Buster knew it, too. That night, he didn't sleep. He paced the hallway of the lodge, checking doors, sniffing vents, waiting. In the morning, Harper stood beside him, mirroring his movements. Brad watched from the kitchen. She's building something. Or someone, I muttered. Another letter came the next day, hand-delivered, slipped under our door while we slept. 3 more crates. 1 is real. 2 are bait. Choose wrong, and you lose him. Let's test your bond. Attached. Coordinates. We drove there by noon. The field was overgrown, dotted with scattered trash and old fencing. 3 crates were placed like pieces on a chessboard, each nearly identical. Buster sniffed the air, walked slowly toward the center crate, paused, turned away. He moved to the one on the left, sniffed the base, whined. I opened it. Inside was a small brown dog with wide, terrified eyes. The other 2 crates? Empty. But wired with a pressure mechanism connected to a loud, snapping trap. Not enough to kill, but enough to injure. We disarmed them, marked the field for authorities. Back at the lodge, Buster finally ate. Harper curled up beside him. Both of them watched the window. The woman hadn't made a mistake. She was guiding us again. But something was changing. Buster wasn't just reacting now. He was anticipating her next move. And she knew it. We left at dawn. It didn't feel like the beginning of something. It felt like the edge of a final step, like a breath being held in the lungs of the woods. Buster was already at the door when I opened it. Ears up. Body stiff. Harper stood behind him. No leash. Just trust. The note from the night before had been different. Typed again. No photo this time. Just an address. No taunt. No game. Last crate. 1 choice. You know which one. We drove in silence. Brad behind the wheel, eyes scanning the road. Buster leaned against the glass, nose twitching. Harper never once sat down. He stared out the rear window the entire time, like he was watching for something we couldn't see. The address took us into a region we hadn't touched before. Flatland broken only by distant barns and rust-colored silos. The gravel road curved through a thicket of trees, then opened up into a clearing where a large, crumbling structure stood half-sunken in shadow. It looked like an old dairy barn, the roof caved in at one end, the other swallowed by ivy. We stopped at the tree line. Buster jumped out immediately, nose to the ground. He sniffed once, then again. Then he looked back at me. I nodded. We moved slowly. No sudden steps, no weapons. Brad scanned the windows. I checked the ground for wires, signs of traps, anything that might turn this into something more than a final message. Inside the barn, light filtered through cracks in the wood, slicing the dust into ribbons. There were crates. Not 1, not 3, 5. each one spaced evenly in a semicircle, each one with something inside. Buster stood at the center. He looked at each crate, one by one. Then he walked to the third from the left. Sat. Waited. Harper stood behind him. I approached slowly, heart pounding. Inside the crate was a dog. Small. Black and white fur. Shivering, but alert. I opened it. The dog hesitated, then ran straight to Buster. He didn't flinch. He let the dog nuzzle into his side, wrapping his paw protectively around its back. And that's when we heard it. A voice. "He always chooses right." Brad spun, flashlight raised. The beam landed on a figure standing in the far corner of the barn. Hood up, face shadowed, but not moving. "Don't," she said. "Just listen." She stepped forward slowly, no weapon in hand, just a leash coiled around her wrist. "I've been watching him since that first ditch," she said, voice quiet. "Since the day he left and came back." I didn't speak. Neither did Brad. She looked at Buster. "He's not just good at finding dogs. He knows who needs to be found. He knew before you did. He always knew." "You've used him," I said. She nodded. "Yes, but so did you, just in a way that felt nicer." "You hurt them." She shook her head. "I didn't. I gave them a choice. The strong ones led the weak. The brave ones stayed. The clever ones survived. The rest, you caged them. I tested them, because the world does worse." Buster growled, low and steady. Her eyes dropped to him. He passed every test, not because he was trained, because he chose to. Brad stepped forward. "You're done." She smiled faintly. "You're right." She reached into her coat slowly, then tossed a small box onto the floor. It slid across the barn and landed at my feet. Inside were photos. Every rescue, every crate, every field. Every time she had left something behind, she had documented it. Not to hide from us, but to preserve the moments. "I knew one day it would end," she said. "He would find them all, and then he'd find me." We called it in. She didn't run, didn't resist. When the deputies arrived 20 minutes later, she handed herself over without a word. No dramatic outburst, no confession, just silence. We stayed behind, checked every crate. All of them had dogs inside, some healthy, some weak, all alive. Buster and Harper walked among them, noses working, bodies still. They knew it was over, at least this part. The sun was setting by the time we got the last of the dogs loaded into vans. Harper jumped into the back of ours without needing a command. Buster followed, but not before circling the barn one last time. He paused at the center, looked at the dust-covered floor, then back at me. He wagged his tail. We drove back toward town as night fell. Halfway through the drive, Buster shifted and laid his head on my arm. He didn't move again until we got home. Back at the shelter, Eli was waiting. Henry stood beside him. When he saw Buster, he lit up like it was Christmas morning. Buster trotted to him and pressed his nose into the boy's hand. "You did it," Eli said. I looked down at Buster. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't even sigh. He just sat, watching the door, still ready, just in case someone else needed to be found.